Hi everybody. So let's see the practical project we are going to develop in the next couple of lessons. So the coding is in the background and this is the coding you will be learning. And when you run this app, you will see a dynamic user interface generated. What I mean by a dynamic user interface is, let's say if the user select a question like what is your gender, then it dynamically generates the user interface. And if the user select a choice and click next, it will dynamically figure out what the choice and store it. Let's say it stores it. And let's say if you select another question like what are the banks you are dealing with, then it shows a different set of user interfaces generated dynamically where the user can select, let's say, the options and click next, and then those options are again written or saved for future reference. And let's say if the user select what is your name, then it dynamically generates the UI. And let's say the user can type something from the keyboard and click next, and then that value is stored once again. So this practical will show you how to develop a dynamic user interface and how to access the dynamic user interface elements dynamically. When I say access dynamically, because when you click the next button, you don't know whether it can be a checkbox list or it can be radio buttons or it can be something else. So that is what I mean. When you click the next button, you will learn how to dynamically figure it out, whether it's a checkbox or radio buttons and likewise. So this is a very simple exercise, but it's very powerful and it will give you advanced knowledge about dynamic user interface developments. So we are very excited to develop this app, and now let's go and develop this app. Hi everyone. So the lesson is Dynamic UI, Simple Example Part 1. We'll be using these tools for this lecture, and make sure you have gone through these prerequisites before you follow this lecture. So in this lesson, practical lesson, you will be learning about Dynamic UI and how to create a user interface dynamically. So this means without statically creating the user interface by dragging and dropping it from the toolbox. Now, normally when you create a user interface, you will drag and drop from the toolbox and you will make a fixed user interface. That is what we call as a static user interface. So most of the applications, let's say 75% of the applications, that's fine. But there are some special software or special applications which are very data intensive. We call them as data driven apps. So when you are creating such specialized software, this dynamic UI knowledge is going to help you a lot, because this is how you will have to do such dynamic apps. So under this, you will be learning about adding and displaying user interface components dynamically and how to access them and find them later dynamically. For this, you will be using a special tool called placeholders, and you will learn these mechanisms under placeholders. And also we will use some drop down lists and some radio buttons as use interface components for you to experiment. And then we will also discuss about the use of is pause back method, and especially the use of view state. It's going to be a very practical lesson. As usual, it's going to be practical demonstrations, and now let's go and start doing the practical. So let's start the project. So create a new project in Visual Studio. Let's say ASP.NET C# web project. Make sure you select ASP.NET framework. Let's select that. You can see I'm selecting ASP.NET web application.NET framework. Make sure it's .NET framework and C#. Okay, select it and click next, and give a name and a location for you to save this project. And now click create. So it will create the project. Select empty project and say create, and now it's creating a empty ASP.NET C# project. So we will start by creating a ASP .NET file. So let's say add new item and make it's ASP.NET page I'm creating. So let's call it as dynamic UI example. Let's click the add button. So then it created the ASP page. Now let's go to the design of the ASP page. Let's click this and let's go to the design, and let's say dynamic UI, let's say simple example. Okay, and then we will just use these tools and give some color, etc., right? Some basic, let's give font size and a color. So this is a simple test example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the, let's say, the input type. For that we can select let's say user interface type what we want to create with, let's say whether it's a radio button or checkbox. This just to get the idea how to create dynamic user interfaces. So then let me put a drop down list, so where you can select select the component, and let's give a ID in the property palette. Okay, let's give a meaningful ID into this. So I gave the ID as input type drop down list 1, so which is a meaningful name. Now what I want to do is when I run this, I want this to be loaded with some sample data such as a checkbox, list box, so I can select it from this drop down. So let's do it now. If you look at the source which is auto generated, if you just click the source, you can see when you add the drop down list, it has added a drop down. Now I want to fill this with data when you run. So what I'm going to do is in the corresponding C# file, look at my mouse over here, right hand side. So I'm going to double click on the C# file, and inside the page load, I'm going to write coding so that it will load some data into that drop down. Let's do it now. So I added 3 items. So this is the drop down list ID which you gave, like if you remember, while we were in the design, I selected the drop down and I gave ID in the property palette. So if I select it once again, if you look at the properties, if you go to the bottom, you can see the ID is input type drop down list 1. So what I'm telling is into that input type drop down list 1, there's a property called items. So if I just show it to you in a line below, you will see it very clearly. So if I put a dot items, so you can see it's a property items. Then into that I can say add is a method, as you can see, and then into that you can add a new list item. So likewise I have added 3 items. Now let's run this and see how it looks. So when you click the run button, it will run this web application, right? It's taking a little bit of time because it's running it for the first time, because it has to process the application. So now you can see now that it has added these 3 items: text box, checkbox, and radio button. So what I want to do is when I click checkbox, I want to dynamically create a checkbox and display below. If I click radio, I want to dynamically create a radio button and display it below. Okay, and then that's what we are going to do now. So I just typed it as radio button, so it's more meaningful. So I'm just going to add an image as well. So into the project, I'm going to add a folder called images, and then I'm going to put the images into this, and also after that I will be adding, let's say I will go to toolbox, let's put an image, and then I will connect the image into that. So let me download the image and add into this. So I have added an image, and if you are not sure of how to do this, look at our previous lessons on adding an image. This is just to decorate it. Now my task is when I select checkbox, I want to display a checkbox dynamically. the dynamic UI interface development. So now let's start doing that part. So in order to complete the app, I will also add a button. Let's say let's put a button here, and I'm going to call it as the next button. And also below that, let's put a label so I can display some text, So I put a label. Okay. So then the button, the text, I will call it as next button, right? Next. And I will give an ID for it as BTN next. A text is an ID is given so that you can use it. So for the label, I gave ID as LBL answer value, so I can refer it, Now, what I want to do is I just want to start with the next button and see whether the click event is going to work. So I'm going to double click on the next button, and I'm going to access that LBL answer value label, and I'm going to say text is equal to, let's say, button clicked, right? I'm going to, so I just type the text as button click. Now let's run and see this. So when I run and click the next button, let's click the next button, you can see it's working. So it says button click. So now I know that the next button click is working. So now what I would like to do is to start with, when I select, let's say, text box, for example, I want this to say text box selected. If I click checkbox, I want this to say checkbox selected. If I click radio button, I want this to say, so that I know the click event of the drop down is working. That is first thing. Then I can see there's another problem here. The second thing is it has duplicated the data. This happens each time I click the button. So if I click the button again, it adds 3 more. Now that's another problem. So let me explain what's that problem first, so you can get a idea of what's happening there. So why it's duplicating that data is because every time I click a button on a ASP page, it submits a request to the page itself. So this is the page. The page is dynamic UI page ASP. When I click the button, when I run the web application and click the button, even though I'm not mentioning, it will make a request to the web page, meaning it will load the page again. So if I click the button for the second time, it will load the page again, the same page, this page. So every time a page is loaded, you can see that the page load event is will trigger, and then that is why it adds this item. So if I click the button 3 times, it will run the page load event 3 times, because each time I click the button, it's loading the page and then it's adding this. So this is the default behavior. So I need to check this now. So what I have to tell here is run this code only when this page is loaded for the first time, because I want this data to be added only once. So how do I say that do this code only for the first time? For that, there is a concept. I will write the coding now, and then I will explain the coding to you. The concept is post back. So what is post back? Post back means, as the name itself says, if you look at this post, so post means in general send. Okay, send back. Back means like again. So post back means it's like send the data again. So basically that is what happens when you click a button. When you click a button on the ASP page, it's loading the page again, meaning it's while loading, it's kind of it is posting the data back to the page. So or it's sending the data back to the page. It's a technical term I'm telling here. So in a ASP page in your C# code, you can put a if condition and check this. You can put if condition and check. So what this condition tells you is, okay, if is post back. So if I remove the not, is post back mean, is it posting back the data? This means the page, the button is clicked, or the page is being loaded again for another time or for a second time. So is post back, it's a boolean value. It tells you whether it's a post back. So now you know a post back means has the data been posted back, meaning for example has a button been clicked or something like that. So I want to do this only for the first time, which means I want to do this if it is not a post back. If it is not a post back, if it is not sending data again. So that is why you put a not here. So what you are telling is if not is post back. So if it is not a post back, meaning if it is not a situation where the page is loaded for the second time, only in that case add this. So this will solve the problem. So now if I run this, you will see that however much the times I click the button, it will add this only one. So now you can see it works initially, and now if I click the next button, the button click works, and earlier it had added the data, but now it has not added the data. However much, if I click the button again, it adds only one. So how this is happening is because because each time I click a button, it is a pause back event. So I'm putting if condition telling if it is not a pause back, then only do this. So which means if it is not a pause back means that means the page is loaded for the first time. So only then I'm doing this. So now I solve that problem, right? So now we have a basic application to a certain level. So what I want to do now is whenever I click this and select, let's say, radio button, I want to display a radio button dynamically. So let's do that in the next part. See you all in the next part of this lesson.